sort of the reason why we're all here. So we're all here representing institutional interest in these different models, whether it's competency-based learning, prior learning assessment, whatever these alternative models are. We're here representing our individual institutions. But we're also here under the umbrella of the Florida Virtual Campus, which is a consortium, and we are here supposed to be working together, those of us in the state university system and those of us in the state college system. And so one of the goals I'd like to try to accomplish in this discussion is to think about ways that we can collectively work together to accomplish some of these goals, some of the advantages and disadvantages, things we maybe should not do as statewide partners. And as I've listened today, I keep hearing three themes that seem to be repeating themselves. Policy, culture, and practice, which has given us sort of the unfortunate acronym of PCP. But we won't dwell on that. So with those kinds of overarching themes in mind, I'm going to address questions to our panel. And I would like you to think about questions you might have considering state collaboration in these spaces. But I'll invoke moderator prerogative and start it off with a couple of questions of my own. So I'd like to maybe start with some of the advantages of state collaboration and perhaps even some of the disadvantages. Why should we collaborate? Or is it better to kind of just go it alone? What does collaboration get us that going it alone doesn't? And maybe I'll start with Jay, who has a little experience in this area.
Well, as I said earlier, we're very fortunate in that our system, made up of the 16 colleges, works very closely together, and especially in the curriculum development process. We have one curriculum throughout, except for some specialized programs that are a little bit different at some of the colleges. And we have found that has really helped the students more than anything to understand, especially when some of our colleges are very close together. If they're taking English 101 at one college and they go 30 miles down the road, they can be guaranteed that that's the same course that they took. And that was very important. When it came to online back in the early 2000s, working with SACSCOC, one of the ways that we determined that we could accept each other's credits and allow students to do this without having to actually transcript at the different colleges and so forth. We signed a statewide MOU that allows a course to be delivered from one institution, and that institution is designated as the delivering institution, but the student is enrolled at their home college. So the student says, I'm enrolling in this course, but I'm still a Ashland Community and Technical College student. The course is being taught by West Kentucky, and that agreement allows us to do that without anything penalizing the student. And that was real important. When we got into Learn on Demand, again, we allowed the colleges who were going to be delivering colleges to put together consortiums, and that has worked real well. But we followed the same umbrella MOU that said home college and delivering college, and that's, again, worked well. And really, that collaboration has paid off well for us in the state.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up
Sure.
on that? There's been some discussion about similar sort of models here in Florida, and there's some concern that perhaps a student could kind of, through a Trojan horse strategy, declare a home college and then take more than 25% of their credits from somebody else and back into a degree from another institution where maybe they didn't have the academic credentials to qualify in the first place. And maybe it's less of a concern within the community and technical college system.
Within our system, it's not been a problem. We haven't had that issue.
So you don't have students trying to, how do you monitor to make sure that they get at least 25% of their credits from?
Well, each course still, even though it's the same curriculum, is designated which college they're getting that course from, so we can track it that way.
Yeah, and that kind of designation actually is pretty much required by some of our policy statements, if you actually read through them in detail. I think what you say, the 25%, you could have two institutions where you have 25%.
Right.
That doesn't mean the student necessarily has choice of which one they're going to use as their graduating institution. We just say that the one that's granting the degree has to have at least 25% of the coursework has to be earned at that institution. And if you get real heavily into competency-based, it is an area that you're going to need to pay some attention to because things like credit for prior learning, converting non-credit to credit, CLEP, Dante's, those kinds of credits would, I think, have not been interpreted as being earned at the institution, and so they're not part of the 25% that you can count. So that is a constraint, and it's also a change in our policy within the last couple of years, because we used to have within our policy that at least 25% of the courses had to be earned from colleges within a consortium. And that no longer is part of the standard. The standard now is for the degree granting institutions. So it is something to pay attention to.
Absolutely. And for those of you who don't know, it was mentioned earlier, Bruce also had a role at the Southern Regional Education Board. So you got to be exposed to a bunch of different states and what they were doing.
16.
Yeah. Thank you.
And maybe
16.
a few others. Tom, just a reaction to your last question. I mean, the student could, in fact, be floating as a free agent, if you will, earning credit. But at some point in time, he or she is going to have to cast their lot with some institution that is going to have to make an admissions decision. So there should be, at any point in this process, some gate control, if you will. I should be presenting myself and my credentials for admission to an institution, and if I qualify, fine. If I don't, I don't. But hopefully you would have other options in Florida, which I'm sure you would. So even in this kind of, if you will, free agent notion of accumulating credit, at some point in time you're going to have to take them to an institution. And my hope would be that institutions will continue to use the same criteria that they would use for the review and admission of any student. I want to go back to your first question, though, which is an intriguing one to me. Here we sit in Florida. I know that because it's nice and warm. If you will, it is still the state that many of us point to as the place that had it right in terms of transfer from 2-year to 4-year. And now from the state colleges to your state universities, you engage the private sector, you nonprofit, and you engage the for-profit sector. You worked all of those things out. And to me, it remains one of the great collaborative stories. So here we now move into a new dimension of learning and credit acquisition and prior learning and competency-based. So why wouldn't you want to follow that same model and move your institutions together? To me, it is a no-brainer. Not to say it's easy, but it's a no-brainer. And I would argue that the issues that you confront, the pressures that you will have from your state policymakers are far greater than they were 50 years ago when Wattenberger and other people put together your 2-year to 4-year transfer processes. I think you're going to be forced to do this by policymakers, and so my view is don't wait for them to force it. Bring them the plan. You come up with the plan. And to me, this meeting is, I think, a representation of the first step. The meeting back in December, Nancy, a little bit different context, but again, I think kind of moving in the same direction. So my view is I'd go to the point. I'd take the mountain and then let everyone come to you versus letting you have to climb that mountain later on.
I think some of the things that you're referencing to are like common course numbering and the articulation. And,
yep.
And while those are great advantages, and I've heard other states sort of envy that, it also creates its own set of challenges that probably need to be worked out. Let me turn to funding. It's all about the Benjamins, right? What funding models really need to be considered what works, what doesn't work. So for example, Jay, when you were speaking earlier and you were talking about your direct-to-degree program, and you've got these little granular modules, students pay $338 a month, was that correct? Subscription model. How is the state subsidizing the student under that funding model?
Student or the college?
If it's usually it's an FTE sort of ratio.
Right,
so, I mean,
exactly.
just how is it working?
Well, in Kentucky, we only have two funding revenue sources. We have the state appropriation and we have tuition. We don't have local tax base. So right now, as most of you have experienced, our tuition is accounting for about 54%, and state appropriation is only about 46%, and that widens every time we have a new state budget passed. Now, that money, that appropriation that is based on kind of an FTE model, comes down to our system office, and then our 16 presidents determine how that is distributed. And it's a very complicated formula of distribution that has several variables. That money is distributed that way. So there's no discussion, because that's voted on, and that's how that money goes. When I talk about learn on demand, or whether it even be direct to degree, which will be the new format in the subscription model, it will not change the state allocation piece, because the students are declaring a home college. No matter where they're at, they're declaring a home college, so that's where the enrollment number goes. The tuition dollars, however, go to the delivering college. So whichever college is delivering that course or those modules, that's where the tuition dollar is going to go.
All of it, yeah.
It's fractioned according to what the program is. We take all of the instructional cost and administrative support and student support out of that, and then all of the net profit goes back to that college.
So at the system level where you are, is that an appropriation, or do you take a piece of each of those little slices?
Again, it goes back to for the state allocation, the system office gets a percentage of that money according to the formula that is used. For the learn on demand model, only thing we get is to cover our cost. We have centralized some services, so we cover those centralized services cost, but everything else, its net profit will go back to the colleges.
Okay. Bruce or Mike, you guys want to comment on funding? I know as far as FACS is concerned, you just want us to be solvent, right? Yeah.
That's pretty important.
Yeah.
I will say that we are profitable, and that was one of the goals up front from the college presidents. They wanted this to be able to show a positive revenue. So we have been able to do that. It took about 3 years to do it.
Just a very quick comment, and I'm not sure that at least in my thinking of where we're heading, brings very good news. The fundamental model that we now have in place is the one that is in fact under attack by many policymakers in many states. This kind of FTE-driven, high tuition and fee structure is the one that legislators are saying, wait a minute, are there not other options? I think it's one of the reasons why this MOOC craze has kind of taken so much, people have gotten behind it. And they don't, I don't think they, from an academic point of view, there are a lot of real questions, but they see it as it's free. You know, I mentioned earlier the Texas governor's 10,000. Well, the Texas governor talks to the Florida governor, and
we've got one of those 10,000.
You do, and so I think that there's going to be a driver here for how do you reduce the cost, and it's a very, very difficult situation for most of our traditional colleges and universities, and I don't think there's an easy way out of it. We're seeing these strategies of kind of going to more adjuncts. I understand that. That concerns me about, as an old faculty member, of the loss, if you will, of that structure. But we're going to have to adjust to it. It's not to say that colleges and universities are not going to go away. I mean, I love campuses. I'm an online guy, but I love campuses. That's why I like the blended model, and many of you are involved with blended learning. But the fundamental fiscal model that we have for public colleges and universities is going to change. It's either, well, it's going to change. So.
Well, while the microphone's pointing at you, Bruce.
Okay.
You've invoked policy and policymakers. So if you were king of the academic world,
oh my God,
what policy would you change? What should we in Florida focus on when it comes to policy change to enable us to create the kind of environment where we can have more systematic competency-based learning or alternative models or something? Sort of what's the biggest challenge there that we should confront? Because the policymakers are listening right now. The legislature seems to be poised to do something. And we would like to help them make that decision rather than have them do it unto us.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, but
so it's no pressure, but you got to solve
no
all our
pressure.
problems.
Yeah. But since he brought it up,
yeah. You don't live here. You can say whatever you want.
I don't live here, but I might live here. I have to be. There are a couple of things that I would do. One is that I would seek to find an approach that umbrellas all of the colleges, universities in a collaborative effort. Now, I happen to be partial to you have a vehicle, you have a Florida virtual campus. And I think that creates a real opportunity for all institutions. I think you can be competitive within that environment, but I think there can be a level of cooperative competitiveness. I think, again, if I were king, we have far too much duplication in our system, in your systems, in your colleges, universities. Far too much. Again, that's not the easiest thing to say. But what I would say is we've had state agencies for many years, both governing and coordinating boards, that in part were designed to make sure that we didn't have a lot of duplication. And as someone who spent time in those organizations and agencies, probably haven't done a very good job if you look across the landscape. I think you need to be thinking about how you would restructure these programs to meet the needs of Florida citizenry and business and industry, because I think you're going to get pushed in that direction. But you do it with far less competition than you currently have. And there are institutions that are out really competing hard right now in Florida. And there are a lot of institutions from outside of Florida that are competing for these same students. And so I'm not sure that your greatest enemy is inside the state. It's probably outside the state, with all due respect to the straighter lines and the, and listen, I love what Burke's doing, but they will be a driver for change for you. So.
Okay. Thank you,
yep.
King Chaloux.
Thank you.
Vicki, I'll let you ask a question, but I also want to give Jay and Mike a chance to comment on policy change issues.
Come on, guys, step up and be a king for a day.
No way.
Or a minute.
So if you guys have, what policy issues do you think should be confronted first for us to address this sort of at a state level and based on either your experience, Jay, or sort of from a SACS requirements standpoint?
Well, I think that I would definitely agree with Bruce in that I would urge you to take the initiative on this as opposed to it being legislatively driven or mandated in the sense that that's where we often run into problems is where states start making educational policy, especially if they start making policies about delivery, content, those kinds of issues. There have been models in the past. It hasn't happened in many years, but there have been models in the past where legislators have done things that have led to all of the institutions within that system going on sanction, but because of what they've done. And but because our rules don't change just because a legislative body makes a decision. I'll give you a for instance of the kinds of things that cause heartburn among us in a different state. may have happened here as well, but I know it happened in a different state. And that's when the legislature starts to pass the standards by which an institution has to accept IB credit, and says that here's the score on the IB exam, and perhaps even set that at a level which is well below what's considered good practice among institutions of higher education. That's an overreach, I would argue, of legislative prerogative, because they're making educational decisions that should be made by faculty, should be made by academic administrators, not by the legislature. And so that's probably the greatest concern that we would have, regardless of the direction that you go.
I think when we're talking about alternative models and prior learning assessment, IB and AP and CLEP and Dante, as you mentioned earlier, all these things kind of play into it. Jay?
Don't you think it's ironic how state legislators cut our state funding and then come back and start complaining about the high cost of higher education?
Amen, brother.
It's just amazing how when we raise tuition, they start saying, you're just making it unaffordable. And we say, yeah, but that 38% cut you've had to us in the last 5 years, have you considered what that's doing to us?
49%. Yeah,
okay. Now, that said, we do have to do some soul searching in what is a driver for all of this. And I am a firm believer in the completion agenda. We have to pay attention to that. We've been doing a lot of research in this area, and here's some statistics that we don't like to publish, and we're all family here, so I'll tell you. Our average graduate, our associate degree graduate, averages attempting 93 semester credit hours, attempting for 60-hour degree, passes 75, and the average length of our associate degrees, that's with Associate Applied Science and Associate of Arts and Sciences, is 63 hours. Okay, all of that wasted money by the student, and that's a graduate, 93 hours. Now, that's the money side of it. The other thing we're looking at is how quickly they're getting through, not just the hours that they're taking, but what's the pattern of taking those hours. And we've just done a 10-year study, and we looked back about how many full-time students, based on a 15-hour load, which would get them through in 4 semesters, how many students were full-time back in 2002, and how many of them, what percentage are full-time by a 15-hour load in 2012. It has dramatically dropped off. And you know why it's dropped off? It's because of financial aid, definition of a full-time load being 12. And so over the course of a decade, we, as colleges, are guilty of this in advising that we've convinced students that they should only take 12 hours at a time because that's all they need to get their full financial aid award. And thus, we have slowed them down in the process of getting through. We have to do some real soul searching here about what we can do to help students be more efficient and effective in their educational process, so they're not taking 93 hours and that they're not spending 6 years with us to get an associate degree. We have to do something different, and competency-based helps us. Student incentives helps us. Tuition discounts, if you want to call it that, that says we're going to make it cheaper for you if you get through. It will eventually reduce our cost in the long run, and will get students out there, and it will eventually get legislators off our back.
Yeah, I like those comments. As someone who worked for a private institution for 19 years, I can see a lot of public institutions now adopting things which have been common practice in private institutions for a long time, because the whole advising process is something which private institutions have paid very close attention to for a long time, because retention is the lifeblood of a private institution. If you can't retain your students, you go broke, and then you shut your doors. So that's something that I see schools paying more attention to, and I think it's a very, very good approach. you're right, the 12 hours is a full-time load. If you go to most private institutions, the full-time tuition is based on a 12-hour load. But if you take 15, it costs you the same thing. If you take 18, it costs you the same thing. There's no increase in the cost except maybe fees for specific courses. So there are things that I think you can learn that are already out there that people are using that you can use effectively, and they carry over to innovative approaches, new approaches, and the like.
All right, we're about halfway through. You probably have questions of your own. I know Vicki Westergaard does. So.
Thank you.
you
I've just been waiting patiently and trying not to breathe into the mic.
That's creepy.
This is sort of a policy question, though not as direct as the ones you've been discussing. And for Dr. Box, does Kentucky have a common learning management system? If so, did you have it before Learn on Demand, and how did you get to that point?
Yes. Within our system, we did, for sure. And we've been Blackboard, Angel, Blackboard, and it doesn't matter. It's all going to be Blackboard in the future. So, Pearson, excuse me. But no, yeah, we had that for the community college system, but we've also worked with our Kentucky, as I talked yesterday about the Kentucky Distance Learning Steering Team, and all of our institutions but one, the four-year universities, are under a Blackboard, plus our public schools are using Blackboard. So it's a great thing in that our students coming all the way up see a same learning management system. The familiarity is very good. The difference is that we're on Service Pack 10 now, and most of the universities are 2 or 3 releases behind, or maybe 4 releases behind. So there is a difference in that aspect.
And why is that one school not with everyone else?
That's the University of Kentucky. Let me guess.
No, it's not. I think it's Murray State, but beats me.
It's got to be some historical.
Well, let me follow up on that, because that's actually similar to a question I had in my notes. Do you think it's possible for us to have meaningful collaboration across the state college system and the university system without a common technological infrastructure, whether that includes the e-learning LMS or the SIS or whatever else you're using, advising systems or something? Because I don't see that happening in the short term here, yet we have the same goals, I think, that we've articulated. You can say no, but please don't.
Yes. But that's the right answer.
It's the but that.
Again, we're a very small state compared to Florida. You have a lot more challenges than we do, but you also have a tradition of collaboration, which plays well for you. And I think it's very possible. Can you, without common learning management systems and student support systems, so forth? I think you can. As I mentioned yesterday, that the universities are now looking at adopting our Learn on Demand formula and method to offer a new Commonwealth College model. And that's going to be very interesting to see how that develops, because one of the reasons they've said this is a good idea is because we've already worked through all the roadblocks and the barriers, and we've already got this statewide contract with Blackboard Student Services that they can piggyback on and reduce their cost, and they won't have to develop their own systems within. So I think there are some ways that you do it, and I think it's efficiency and economy of scale is very important.
So my answer is yes, and I guess I would use the metaphor of hopping in a car. Everybody drives a different model, make of car, but the road structures that we operate on are kind of governed by the same policies. So I think the real challenge for you is in the policy construct. That's where you reach commonality. You do not have to all be on the same platform. Some of us had problems moving the dial on the whatever the machine was here.
Why are you pointing at me, Bruce?
Well, yeah, so those of us who become Mac devotees, we're hitting the wrong keys. But we worked through that. And it wasn't that long ago when if you had a Mac, you couldn't do anything that was Windows-based or vice versa. You know, if those two companies with their disparate systems can get together, we certainly can. So I think the focus should be much more on policy and programmatic, systematic, if you will, collaboration, strategies for how you're going to assess credits and how they're going to get transcripted, and institutions are going to do what institutions do with respect to their technology infrastructure. And those things connect. And so I would spend less time and certainly less money on that aspect. Could you save money by everyone going to the, you probably could, but I think Jay's point is a good one. You're a big system. I'll use the term system in terms of both your state college and your university and your universities. But you're too far down the road. I mean, to kind of pull up stakes and say, okay, we're going to go to this.
Other questions from the audience? Because if not, I have more. You may not like my questions. All right, keep thinking. So, Bruce, you mentioned, you referenced the Florida Virtual Campus. Mm-hmm. Do you think, and I guess this might apply to Jay as well, from a system level, centralized organizing body, do you think you need a neutral third party to coordinate this sort of statewide innovative culture or for innovative programs? Or do you think that there are advantages, or that even it's necessary to have some sort of external group that pushes this?
So I have to come clean and say to you that in many respects, and again, I think this relates to much of my past experiences, I'm a bit of a centrist. So I now head up a consortium. Now, I'm not sure the term consortium for what we're doing with the Sloan folks now is the right term, but the general framework of facilitating larger groups of institutions, if you will, is a reasonable one. And so I would argue that there are economies of scale, and I think work that you can do at the state level, again, less focused on cost and much more focused on policy, that, if you will, a third party could facilitate. I mean, and this has been a model. I'm not arguing for anything that's innovative. I'm arguing for models that have been in place and have been effective in many states, and some of them have been less effective than others, to move whatever your educational objectives are moving forward. And I would add one thing. I think it would allow some degrees of freedom for institutions to continue to be competitive, and I would add collaboratively competitive, but I think it would allow you to do that. The alternative is, I think one of the alternatives would be, everybody have at it. Go do what you want to do, and I think ultimately you hurt the students in the state, business and industry in the state. Because then you have the student who's kind of wandering around saying, okay, well, where do I go? What do I do? How do I do these kinds of things? And I think that's what you really want to address, and I think you would do that better probably by having some, and again, you've got a structure that some of those things are already being done now. Here you sit because in part of that organization.
Jay, you want to make any comment about the necessity of a sort of centralized coordinating group?
Yeah, I think a centralized coordinating group is important, and I'm going to throw out SACS as an example, because SACSCOC is a centralized body, but it's made up of us, and all of the policies are determined by us, and you have an active board that is members of us, but they are charged with enforcing it and making sure policy happens and it gets organized and structured in ways that can bring about some type of common feel and look of how we stay quality in our education. So I think that's a good model for us, that you have your elected group here that is serving on it, but you need a central office function that's really going to keep you going in the right direction.
It ties in with your funding model to some extent here too. It's not an independent question, I don't think. And to some extent, I'm just speaking as an economist. I'm not speaking as a SACSCOC person right now. But you know, Jay mentioned
qualifying too many responses. With that.
Sorry about that. But we don't make policy as staff. You know, that's why I try to stay off as best I can off of the listserv, because I don't want to make policy. But there are economies of scale in what we're talking about, and some of your institutions are large enough already to probably have most of those economies of scale. Some of them clearly are not. You certainly benefit those institutions that are not large enough to have those economies of scale by having some centralized functions. But you also have the issue that if you do that, you run into competing against yourself. And Jay talked about that, and as being one of the issues that they face is competing against yourself. So if you want to overcome that, you almost have to centralize to overcome that concern, because you're going to compete against yourself anyway. I mean, that's the thing about online education, online type models, and a lot of these models we're talking about are online. So the institutions are already in a situation where they can compete with themselves. The other thing that centralization allows you to do relative to economies of scale is to offer programs at places that currently can't offer them because of those economies of scale. And it seems to me there's no way to do that unless you do that at some sort of consortium type level.
Leveling playing fields.
Yeah.
So here in Florida, as you may be aware, I know Bruce is aware, there's been a study by a consultant funded through our Board of Governors about the future of online education. And there are references to alternative models in their report, including MOOCs, and especially MOOCs. Mm-hmm. And they've outlined several different possible structures for the state. And those include kind of a collaborative model. Then they also include this idea of a lead institution. And there's also been discussion of maybe a hybrid of those two different models. And Jay, when I was listening to you talk earlier, I kept thinking that what you're doing in Kentucky is very much sort of a hybrid between this collaborative model and this lead institution model. And frankly, many of us can't quite figure out what the lead institution model really means or could look like in this context. And I wonder if maybe you could comment on how it's worked in Kentucky. You've alluded to some of the evolution of that, and then what you think the advantages and disadvantages of that are.
Yeah, and let me clarify about roles of lead institutions. Lead institutions were determined on the delivery side. In other words, through that RFP process, one institution was awarded a certain course or a certain program to develop and manage. So they are responsible for example, Elizabethtown Community and Technical College has the business degree. As a lead institution, they are responsible for the SACS accreditation issues. They're responsible for assigning faculty, setting up the courses, and all the things that have to deal with that. All of the other 15 colleges can accept the courses being delivered by that entity, that program. The lead institution is one factor, but the leadership of the entire enterprise is different. And we started off with a board of directors that was the 16 college presidents and the KCTCS cabinet. That's where it kind of fell apart, because we had half of the college presidents who really didn't want this model. They said they did at the beginning, but they didn't. And so as a board of directors, when you've got half of your board that doesn't want to move forward, you kind of get to a situation where you don't move forward. And it was kind of hard to get anything done. And so the centralized services piece, managing it from the centralized services about what are our next steps, how do we progress, was hindered by our board of directors. So the ultimate CEO our president of our system, Mike McCall, said, I've had it. We can't do anything, so we're going to change the model, and said, now we're going to go away from having all 16 of you on a board to, I want all of you. He drew a line in the sand and said, I want those of you who want to be on this board and promote this program to step forward. Well, a lot of schools stepped back real quick, but we had 6 colleges that stepped forward. And he right there, he changed the model and said, these 6 colleges will now be the new board of directors, which we changed the name of it. But that's made a big difference for us. All of a sudden, we're moving forward again because that group wants to move forward. It hasn't changed the responsibility of those institutions who are leads for delivering. They still have, in a contract with us, that responsibility to deliver. It has changed the revenue model and how that's distributed.
Well, if I could pull on that string a little bit. So you've got one particular institution that becomes the lead institution for a particular program. Let's just say business. Mm-hmm. Suppose one of your other institutions, particularly one of these that stepped back from that line, decides, I want to put a business program online. Are they allowed, or are they statutorily prohibited from doing so since there's somebody already in that space?
They're not disallowed from putting a business program out there online, and many of them have courses in that direction and programs. What they are prohibited from doing is putting it out there in this model. They could not deliver it in a competency-based model where they're actually competing with Learn on Demand. They just couldn't do it.
And let me give you another example of that in another southern state, Louisiana, where I think it's kind of worked, Tom, in the same fashion. They have an adult degree completion program called CALL. The intent of CALL, and there's a group of folks from institutions who are kind of the advisory group. That group came together and set the policies for how an institution could participate in this CALL program. So it had a set of requirements. You have to do this, 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 and this. There are institutions in the states that said, we don't want to do that. Okay, you can't play in our sandbox because these are the rules for engagement in the sandbox. They used the same model of saying to Northwestern State University, this is your program. And LSU Eunice, this is your program. So they kind of divvied up the pot in terms of programs, but then they said, but if we are not meeting the demand in the state, then we will trigger additional programmatic opportunities. So nursing was a good example. They had a 2+2 completion program. They filled up all their slots. They had another institution that brought in the program. What was the key? Why did it work? It really goes back to, I think, Jay's point of there's value added for participating in this program, particularly on the marketing side. It had a huge impact on the state and the citizens of the state who recognized the program. It's interesting. I could talk to a lot of students down there, and they would say, I'm a CALL student. I said, no, you're a student at LSU Eunice. No, I'm a CALL student. Okay, you're a CALL student. You branded, it's like Xerox copies. Xerox got out front with a copier machine, and people started calling them Xerox copies. So you can correct people to say, no, it's not a Xerox copy, it's a photocopy. The name stuck, CALL stuck. And yet, the individual institutions all had their programs, well managed. I was going to use the term well controlled, but I have to be careful about that. But it was. And they had a feature which allowed it to ratchet up to meet demand. So I think it's very similar to the Kentucky model, where you can create an arrangement whereby in this program with the policies, this is, if you want to play, here are the rules.
All right, at the risk of contributing to my own MOOC fatigue, is everybody else sort of tired of hearing about MOOCs? But if I stretched out on a line, it seems like at one end you have MOOCs, where you're serving 160,000 students at one time. And at the other end you have competency-based learning, where you're serving one student at a time, sort of individually. Although over here, on the competency-based side, you are awarding credit. Maybe not on the MOOC side, at least by and large. But with competency-based education, it seems like you're almost connecting those two ends of the circle, where if somebody can demonstrate competency based on what they learned in a MOOC, then they will get the credit. And with that sort of premise, I wonder if you could comment on what you think the place of MOOCs is in competency-based education. It seems like every day when I read the Chronicle, there's another school that's experimenting with credit, or ACE, which just came out. What is the role of MOOCs in competency-based education? Look 3 years ahead.
Well, I just mentioned one distinction we haven't made right now. And I'm looking at our standards right now and a distinction we make in our standards. We don't speak in terms of course competencies. We speak in terms of program competencies or program student learning outcomes. And if the course, the MOOC, contributes to that, I can certainly see how if you have a competency-driven program, the MOOC may satisfy certain, passing a specific MOOC at a credit level or through a credit by examination that you might have available for the student who's taken the MOOC, who can demonstrate competency, then they demonstrate competency. Or if they meet the competencies and the expectations you identify for a course, then you can transfer in the course. If you can be assured that the student who registered for it took it, you know, that's one of the issues with MOOCs, which Coursera has approached. I mean, you can get a certificate from Coursera for passing a course that says you passed this course, but the basic certificate is a very minimal level of review in terms of knowing whether you're who you say you are and the like. But to get that next level of certification that they offer, they use ProctorU. And so, you know, once you step up to that level, you're in the same world as you are transferring in, to some extent, a course from anyone else who is offering 4-credit courses, except it's not a 4-credit experience. It's a non-credit course for which you would be granting credit. But our rules allow that, so I don't see that as a problem on a course-by-course basis. I do see it as a problem if institutions say, we'll take your certificates that don't validate who you are or don't validate that you've actually met the competencies in the course, and it's more of a completion certificate. You know, that you shouldn't be taking in any event. But you could still do credit by examination in those courses. You can just convert over how you're going to award the credit.
We do that
from
now.
do that. You do that now.
Outside of MOOCs.
That's right.
Yeah, Mike, I think you're right on target. I agree. We have options right now, and we don't ask whether a student sat in 150,000 seat MOOC course, or whether he or she went to their local library or visited one of your campuses or started a course at your institution and dropped out, but decided to keep learning on his or her own volition. We have mechanisms for then assessing whether or not a student, and we do have some. I'm not sure those are the strongest suit that we have to play yet, and I think, so if I look 3 years down the road, kind of tie this together, I think our assessment of competencies, however a student learns, is really the key to me. And whether it's a MOOC or not. I'll give you a quick example. I was at Virginia Tech for 14 years. And Virginia Tech launched the Math Emporium, which most of you have probably heard about. Fundamental change in terms of how math was taught. Because before, math, which is a big deal at an engineering school for the most part, was taught in sections of 15 to 18 to 20 students, and there were dozens and dozens and dozens of sections, most of which were taught by graduate teaching assistants, because that's the only way you could manage that number. So they bought an old Rose's department store and turned it into a Math Emporium. It was all done online. It was self-paced. It went through the review by the Commission on Colleges without an issue. It essentially was a strategy for allowing a student to learn at his or her pace, and if they knew math at the front end and could sit and take that competency examination, which all of the faculty had agreed upon, so the criteria had been established, the student was fine to move on. And I recall the first semester that opened. There were students who registered for a math course, and at week 14 decided, well, maybe I ought to go over to the old department store and check in, and by that time they were gone. Because all of the skills sets that were available, all the resources, all of the lectures that students could ask for a lecture, and they had their own lecture section within that facility. Students learned, the word got out, don't wait until week 14 of a 15-week semester to take this course. So there are some models out there that I think are very effective. The key to me is how you then assess whether or not the student has a competency at the end of however they have acquired whatever skill or knowledge you have wanted them to demonstrate.
Okay. In the 3 minutes we have left here, since we're in Orlando, I will say that I'll use an amusement park analogy. That as we get into the ride and put our harness down and get ready for what will probably be a very interesting up and down legislative session with many G-forces against us, what advice do you have for us on how we can help to grapple with these issues of innovative assessment and competency-based learning and prior learning assessment and making sure that we keep our friends in Atlanta happy and do it in about a minute. So solve all of our problems in a minute. Last words of wisdom.
Whitewater.
Whitewater.
Be sure you, A, tighten your seat belts and have a life preserver on when you hit the whitewater, right?
I think we're going through the largest evolution of higher education that we've ever gone through, and it's going to be a lot different world in 10 years. MOOCs, all these other things that we're talking about are going to really threaten the faculty, because there's going to be a whole lot more attention on an expert that can deliver to multiple people, and the role is going to change to assessment. How are we managing the assessment process? And we really need to protect and value our faculty, and we want to make sure that they're engaged in everything. And as far as the state politics, I'll leave that to someone else.
Well, any last questions? Yes.
We'd like to know, what is your thought of the ICUP? Not in your state specific, but...
So to define, ICUP is the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida, the non-profit University of Miami, Nova Southeastern, Embry-Riddle, those. So the question is, what do they think about them? They like them.
We like them.
Where do they fit in this?
Where would you see us fitting in?
I'm speaking to our Kentucky group of privates, I think it's 2 weeks from now, for that very discussion. I don't know where they fit in, but they're very interested in trying to fit in, and so we'll have some discussions on that. I don't know.
Do you feel like they were thinking in it from the beginning that would have been helpful, or do you think the state should move forward and have us wait and come in later? How do you see that?
I know in the earlier days of back when you had a KYVU, there were private members as the part of the Kentucky Virtual University, and so there's nothing that necessarily prohibits it unless it's a fund sharing model, right, which creates a barrier. Certainly, it doesn't create a barrier to us to have a consortium between institutions that are public and private. Where we run into bigger problems is when the consortium includes non-accredited members and accredited members. Makes it a little bit messier because it also has some federal implications, especially if they're not authorized to take Title IV funding. But it doesn't affect us.
Accredited.
And I would say that any state that does not look at its entire set of higher education resources, public, private, and I would include for-profit, is being short-sighted. And particularly the larger the state with the size of the population you have, If I'm looking at this from the state perspective, I want to have as many institutions engaged and involved and supporting a set of policies that would help our citizens as we could. And so there's no reason in my mind, or my view, why you would not, A, want to subscribe and to participate in these programs and to make sure that credits are recognized in the same fashion that we've recognized by everyone else in the state. You've done that already in terms of traditional credit articulation. So my tent would be as big as it could be for all of the players in post-secondary education in the state.
You know, an example comes to mind where I just wish we had had MOOCs 10, 15 years ago when I was directing an MBA program at a small private college. Where we had foundation courses that students had to have as part of their matriculation into and through the program, where we would allow them to be accepted, say if they had an English degree or a communications degree, but they had to have the equivalent of principles of accounting and principles of economics and business calculus and some of those courses, at least at the undergraduate level. That would be fine. Well, we had to teach those as lost leaders, basically. I mean, we would run classes with 3 students in them, and we didn't make any money on those classes, I can tell you right now. It would have been so much easier if we had another alternative where we could say, oh, you know, there's a MOOC on that. Go take it and bring your certificate in. We don't even have to have credit. We just have to have evidence of the competency. And golly, I mean, how wonderful would that have been if we'd had it? It would have saved us a bundle.
Great example.
All right, well, we seem to be out of time, so please join me in thanking our panel. I think this was really good food for thought.